All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Villanova Tip Time. Today is Saturday, January 23rd, and we are here as the Cats will be taking on Providence Friars in about 20 minutes. You're going to see this game on Fox proper, so national major channel today. Always exciting to see for all the Cats fans out there in Nova Nation. Today, we're going to break it down, talk a little bit, go around the horn, talk a little bit about what we're seeing at the top of college basketball, some of the movers and shakers from in the time that we since saw you last on Tuesday. we'll do a little bit of an introspective, a little bit deeper on the Big East musings from this week. We'll talk a little bit about what we saw from Villanova Seton Hall in a great Big East basketball game on Tuesday night, where we saw you last. And then we'll talk a little bit about who this Providence Friars team and what you can expect from tonight's game. So we got about 20 minutes to go through it all, and there's a lot to cover. It's been an exciting week in college basketball, despite the fact that you're still seeing, COVID postponements and delays across the league, across the leagues, I should say. Every night, if you look at sort of the score sheet for the top 25 or even conference by conference, you're seeing a handful of games that have been postponed or canceled, which is sad. But again, like we've talked about, really exciting to see this college basketball season press on. All signs point to being able to finish season, being able to see our conference tournaments, and then being able to see a real exciting sort of one-of-a-kind NCAA tournament all happening in and around the Indianapolis area. We'll talk much more about that in future shows, I'm sure. But getting into sort of the around the horn at the top of college basketball, Gonzaga, Baylor, and Nova all holding steady as your top three in the nation. It was just announced that Oklahoma State, who is playing Baylor today, Oklahoma State, who's a really strong program, really strong team, actually currently on a postseason ban. So I think they get talked about a lot less than they probably would have otherwise. But their star player, Cade Cunningham for Oklahoma State, who's regarded as one of the best players in the nation, likely a lotto pick when he decides to go to the NBA. But it was announced that Cade Cunningham is going to be out today against Baylor. So not expecting any upsets there. And we expect Gonzaga and Baylor to hold steady at top two. And, of course, Villanova to hold steady at top three if they can get by Providence today. Elsewhere around sort of the top 10, we saw number 6 Tennessee get absolutely walloped at Florida on Tuesday night, with that game going final around the time that the Villanova Seton Hall game tipped off. Tennessee is going to face a 19th ranked Missouri team today, so no rest for the weary today, looking to see if they can get a bounce back win and sort of stay worthy of that top tier national ranking. One other team to call out was number 20 Clemson. They've been bouncing around at the bottom of the top 25 for most of the season. They got handled pretty well at Georgia Tech, who is sneaky, having a 7-3 overall and 3-1 season in the ACC so far. Haven't played as many games due to some COVID layoffs in their program, but you can expect to see Clemson drop after that loss. In what was likely considered to be the upset of the week by some, we saw Indiana, who's had a bunch of moral victories and tight losses to really good teams, somehow figure out how to put the brakes on number 4 Iowa, who we've been very high on here at Villanova Tip Time, in beating them 81-69 on Thursday. Worth noting that this Iowa team, which is a scoring machine, Indiana did a really good job not only to put the brakes on, but it's also worth noting that this game missed the over by a half a point. So always one of those nail biters you love to see coming down to the wire in the betting world. And then today, we've already had a couple of upsets on the books. Number 9th ranked Kansas just went final, losing at Oklahoma 75-68. Virginia Tech, ranked number 16. Nova Nation knows them well as the only loss so far on our calendar. Lost today at Syracuse by 18, where they were, I would say, pretty close coming out of halftime, and Cuse just ran away and dominated the second half. One of the biggest upsets this week on the national stage, but specifically, in Big East world, is our opponent who Nova's facing today in Providence, who went on the road and beat Creighton earlier this week in Omaha. Mind you, Creighton ranked 11th in the nation. I'd say this game is absolutely in the conversation for upset of the week, somewhere behind Iowa and probably Florida over Tennessee. I don't know that, again, in the type of season we're having in the Big East, where there are a lot of sort of bubble teams, really, really good programs in sort of the middle of the conference. I don't know that it necessarily shocks anybody to see Providence beat Creighton on the road, but it's definitely still a really strong upset in what was a 10-point spread, with Creighton favored by 10 at home. And I think, for all you Villanova fans out there, I think the sort of good news, bad news. Bad news is that, Providence obviously isn't afraid of coming on the road. So you told somebody in the beginning of the week that Providence was going to go on the road and beat Creighton and then go on the road and beat Villanova. Anybody would have said just no way. And Providence took care of that first game with a huge performance from Nate Watson, who we'll talk about in a moment. And that's the bad news, is that they're totally capable of winning these games and winning games like today at Villanova. The good news is maybe they got it out of their system, right? Because like I said, you go back to the beginning of the week and you say, hey, Providence is going to win both of these games on the road at Creighton and Nova. I would have said you were crazy. So maybe they got it out of their system, and going back to back versus Creighton and Villanova is going to be an absolute mountain to climb. So Creighton actually is, I don't know if that game went final. Let's check. We're going to go over to the side screen, advanced production. Creighton's up 7 points with 28 seconds left in that game. So Creighton's about to go on to a final on a bounce back win against UConn at home. UConn currently ranked 23rd, although expected to drop out of the rankings with a loss earlier this week. Now assuredly will drop out of the rankings with back-to-back losses. And Villanova is due to see them in the very near future as well. Overall, again, like I said, not a lot of Big East action since we saw you last on Tuesday. Been quite a number of postponements as several programs are dealing with either COVID issues directly or scheduling issues coming out of COVID. So today we actually are going to see 3 pure Big East games and then St. John's as a non-conference game. So we're getting some good Big East action today. I want to segue into what we saw on Tuesday night from Villanova and Seton Hall, and really what we learned about this Villanova team. We learned a little bit more about the Big East in general, especially coming off a long layoff. I would have to start by saying, to the objective fan, this was a great Big East basketball game. Somewhere in the middle end of the second half, sort of get that feeling of like, man, I hope my squad doesn't lose this game, because it's such a good game that I want to be able to sort of celebrate it as such. And when you walk away from a game like that, that ends up being a bitter loss, as the Seton Hall fans realized very much on Tuesday night. It's a little bit, it's a little bit tougher to point it out. It's just a great basketball game, but it really was. I think hats off to Seton Hall. They really played their best ball from wire to wire. And honestly, at the end, they were one pass and catch away from stealing the W. They shot the lights out for most of the game. And if you're a Villanova fan, you have to love to continue seeing Villanova being the third nationally ranked program, the number 3 nationally ranked program, getting everybody's best punch night in and night out. We talked about that as a trend. Seton Hall was no different. They absolutely shot the lights out. In the first half, it felt like Seton Hall was hitting everything. But somehow Villanova was not only keeping pace, but maintaining a small lead throughout this. So it was really, as a Villanova fan, as a Villanova supporter, you have to love their ability to not only hang in with good teams when they go on runs, but somehow continue to throttle those teams and maintain a small lead. Mamoukelashvili is exactly who we thought he was. He's a star player. He's, having that breakout season. He's taking that next step. He hit a bunch of big shots. He was good for 23 points. But I think that ultimately Nova did a really good job of sort of keeping a lid on him from, having a monster performance. And it made a huge difference. Funny enough, Jared Roden was the guy that we didn't get to talking about on the pregame show because we were sort of running out of time. We had so much to talk about with a month off coming into the show. We didn't get into too many specifics about Seton Hall besides Mamoukelashvili. And Jared Roden was the one, the guy that I had a talking point queued up about that I skipped over. And man, did he make us pay for it. He absolutely lit it up in the first half with 17 points. But the takeaway, if you're a Villanova fan, was both the players and coaches did a tremendous job of making adjustments on Jared Roden in the second half, holding him only to 2 points. So he definitely quieted down and cooled off. But he was hitting shots from all over the floor, from 3, from 2, from everywhere. For Villanova, just to call out the stars of the game, what we saw from them, and performances that we definitely want to see guys building on today. Colin Gillespie had 22 points, led the Cats in points scored, and he really had that answer anytime Seton Hall hit a big 3, which was frequently, and especially in the first half. Colin Gillespie was never looking less than poised. The game could have gotten away from the Cats pretty early on, and he always was coming back down and hitting a big shot. Jermaine Samuels was praised by Coach Wright in the postgame, and rightfully so, for how much of an impact he had, sort of surprisingly to everybody involved, maybe even himself, because of how limited he was in practice. I think they said he only had 1 day of practice from getting cleared from COVID protocol, and he put up his best game of the season. And like we said, he struggled earlier in the season, and there was a lot of speculation that he didn't have enough practice time. So I was a little nervous for the guy coming off of a month layoff where he himself was suffering from this pandemic illness, and he had his best game of the season. He was good for 20 points and 9 boards, and he was everywhere on defense, on rebounding, on overall tenacity. Exactly what you want to see from your two of your senior leaders, just leading the way against a Seton Hall team again that played really great. Honorable mention and trends that we want to call out that we hope to see continue today. Brandon Slater, we've been high on him and the tenacity he's brought to the floor, particularly on the defensive end. He got the start because of injuries, illnesses, what have you. He got the start. He took advantage. He was able to create some scoring opportunities, had 7 points. He added 3 steals, and his defensive presence just cannot be overstated. So love to see him hopefully getting increased minutes, keep hitting the shots when he gets the opportunities. And I think we're going to see more and more as we get into the latter part of the season and into the conference tournament and tournament time. And then Justin Moore, a little quiet with only 10 points. He's averaging 13 a game, so he's slightly below average on points scored, but he had several absolutely dazzling plays around the rim. So coming into this game against a Providence team that is struggling a little bit defensively, you wonder if Justin Moore is going to be able to exploit that at all, because a couple of his plays were just amazing. Just the footwork, the dribbling work around the basket in the lane. Spinning around guys, going over, going under, whatever it was, just looked real pretty, looked really smooth. So would love to see that continue. And then to call out the 2 guys that we didn't see a ton from, Jeremiah Robinson-Earl had one of his roughest games, even though he still managed 8 points very quietly. If you had asked me before I looked at the box score, how many points did he have, I would have said like maybe 2 or 4. He did end up with 8 points. He really struggled with that short to mid-range jumper that he was heavy on in the first half. But kudos to him, because I think in realizing, it just wasn't his night, not finding his shooting touch, he really worked to find the best shots for his teammates and wasn't forcing shots in the second half, as this game was, pretty neck and neck. He did a fine job defensively in a game where, again, Seton Hall a little bit bigger than Villanova. Villanova at times had problems with the size differential, but I think Jeremiah Robinson-Earl did fine on the defensive end there. And then Caleb Daniels was limited to 12 minutes and 0 points. Unclear whether it's lingering effects of him having COVID or this calf injury that's landed him on the injury report. So obviously we're wishing for a continued speedy recovery for him, as he's turned out to be a huge piece of this year's team, and we'd like to see him back in the starting lineup, back to getting minutes, and back to obviously scoring points. So we have we have 7 minutes left until tip-off. Really excited for this game. I think, the Providence games are one that I always have marked on my calendar. It's a family holy war of sorts in my extended family household, if you will. My whole family, I was the second child of my generation of the family to go to college. And so Villanova became sort of the ipso facto, everybody in my extended family rooted for them. And then I have a younger cousin who years later ended up going to Providence. And so her immediate family, obviously her parents, my aunt and uncle, and her brother, who had been, really, really good supporters of Villanova just on my accord, switched loyalty on a dime to Providence, and it's sort of become this like bitter Mets-Yankees rivalry. And as a Mets fan, I am not used to being on the sort of the Yankees side of that, if you will, which is definitely what Villanova would be in this Providence-Villanova rivalry. I will say, though, it's really less bitter because there's so much respect between Coach Wright and Coach Cooley. I think both fan bases have a healthy respect for the other coach being great. And maybe a little bit less love lost from the Providence fans towards Jay Wright, as I would imagine Big East fans are probably sick of hearing how great Jay Wright is. I'll never be sick of that, by the way, as you might imagine. But I have a great respect for Ed Cooley, and I know most fans in the Big East do, as a really strong coach. So talking a little bit about this Providence team now, they've been on a 3-game skid before they beat Creighton earlier this week in a huge road win for the program that confirmed to the rest of college ball that they really are a worthy bubble team at the very least. Of course, they're going to have more work to do to stay in that conversation. But I think the win on the road in Creighton showed everybody that they absolutely can be there come tourney time. The players that you're going to want to watch out for, they actually boast 2 players who are tops on the scoring charts in the Big East. So guard David Duke, who some of you may know, you may have heard, was actually a Villanova recruit that they lost out on to Providence a few years ago. He's now averaging 19.4 points, and he's number 2 in the Big East in scoring average. So that's pretty awesome for him and Providence program. But he has struggled in field goal percentage over the last 4 or 5 games, including in their win over Creighton, where I forget what the exact stat line was, but he had a very poor shooting night overall. The second sort of premier player to watch is going to be center Nate Watson, who had a monster night against Creighton, scoring 29 points. He's 3rd in the Big East in scoring, averaging 19.1, just 0.3 points behind his teammate David Duke. And really, when people talk about this year's Providence team and they say that they're really all about offense, they've been generally poor on defense, defensive rebounding, stealing, second chance points, things like that. So it's a complete 180 for the program since last year, where they were more defensive minded. It definitely on the offensive end centers around Nate Watson, who has been playing great of late and also leads the Big East in field goal percentage overall. So if he gets the ball down low, he's done a great job of creating shots for himself, getting that separation, and sometimes not even needing it at all, just because he's bigger than the other dudes. He stands out above the rest in the Big East, which is pretty heavy on those mid-sized teams. And so Nate Watson, when he finds a favorable matchup, can eat pretty good. So we have a couple of minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about what we're going to see in today's game. So I think, like I was talking about, the story for this Providence team has been being really strong on offense and generally fairly poor on defense. Defensively, they held Creighton to 70 points in their win earlier this week. They won that game 74-70. So just by looking at the scoreboard alone, it couldn't have been a horrible defensive performance. Although at times you see sort of the holes in a team that's been struggling a little bit on the defensive end of the floor. On the Villanova side, as again, more of a mid-sized team, which you would classify Villanova as, they've definitely struggled a little bit against size. You saw that at times against Seton Hall, who's a pretty big team in their own right. But lucky for Villanova Nation, Providence size hasn't really managed to play a huge factor in getting them out of the cellar on defensive rankings. So you're wondering if Villanova, again, against the lackluster defense, there's a couple of things that come to mind. Are they going to be able to stretch the floor and get the shots they want? You'd think so. Are they going to be able to continue that dribble drive penetration that we've seen pretty strong at times from players like Colin Gillespie and Justin Moore? Maybe, and that's a trend that you should look for tonight. The matchup that I'm most excited for is going to be between Nate Watson, who's, again, one of the highest scoring averages in the Big East, against Jeremiah Robinson Earl, who's, one of the biggest NBA prospects in the Big East. That's going to be the matchup to watch. I don't know how consistently they're going to be glued to each other, right? As Jeremiah Robinson Earl, I think, has more shots in his bag of tricks. So you're probably going to see some switching off on the Providence side there. But the question is like they've done all season, can Villanova throttle the Friars' tempo and shooting, or is Providence going to have their way on the offensive end and just get off to the races on their stronger side of the ball, where Villanova then has to keep up? I think in addition, coming off of one of his, called down nights of the season, is this an opportunity for Jeremiah Robinson Earl to have a big bounce back game against an opponent that has a really strong big? It's a chance for him to make a statement, and that seems like the kind of player and the kind of person that he is. You'd like to see him come out and take advantage of that. So, also worth pointing out, both offensively and defensively, the Cats have the edge when you look at things like KenPom ratings, but more so on defense. So if the Friars struggle on defense, can Villanova capitalize on that by scoring, and can they again throttle that tempo? It's just something that you want to see from this game, which team's going to be able to really impose their will, having a good idea of what the game plan from either team is going to be coming in. So just lastly, I know we're coming right down on time here. You all should be leaving me in a moment to go check out the game on Fox. Villanova -11 is the spread. That feels like a big time stay away from me. Villanova's 1-8 against the spread in their last 9 home games, 0-4 against the spread in their last 4 Saturday games. Your best bet as a Nova fan is just to enjoy it and be happy with any win, not have to stress yourself out with a double-digit plus cover. The over-under is 140. If the game hasn't tipped off yet, hammer that over. Villanova games have been an over machine, hitting nicely again on Tuesday against Seton Hall. I like, with both teams having strong offensive efficiency, I like this over 140 a lot today. So be that as it may, go forth and prosper. Have a great Saturday. Ladies and gentlemen, it is tip time.